Today, Open Source Security is talking to James, who is the lead of e18e, which is a project actually Andrew Nesbitt pointed me at, which made me very exciting. And I looked up James and e18e and I was like, holy crap, I've not heard of this before. But James, I'll let you explain because you will do a much better job than I. But welcome to the show. I am very excited for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. But yeah, the e18e project you can summarize it as trying to clean up and improve performance of the JS ecosystem. But obviously that includes like a massive amount of work. So, there are basically a few categories that we've focused on. So one of them, for example, is Speedup. Where we're trying to speed up existing tools and applications. And one of them is cleanup, where we're trying to reduce dependency trees, to have a smaller supply chain footprint, basically. And we also have Levelup, which is where we're producing like alternative libraries to old unmaintained stuff and things that haven't been modernized in a long time. But yeah, the combination of all those, basically, the overall aim is that we've all seen how bad the node modules directory is. so the ultimate goal really is that that's nice and small and it's tidy. There's like a small amount of polyfills if possible because we have modern engines now. And the security improves because you've got fewer dependencies, and the ones that you do have are actively maintained. Then, so it's a focus on like performance, security, and just maintainability, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to set the stage a little bit, maybe for anyone. I suspect everyone knows this, but I'm just going to say it all. So to make sure we understand. So like the node ecosystem is currently legendary for being gigantic, but I would maybe, I don't know if I'd call it bloated necessarily. I mean, I'm not uncomfortable using that word, but it is well understood that when you install almost any node dependency these days, you get like a ton of stuff, often hundreds of packages underneath anything you use. Like if you install any of the web frameworks, you're going to go from you think you installed one dependency to now having like 200 dependencies because it explodes. And you mentioned kind of two important aspects of this is a lot of this stuff is not fast because it was just, slapped together often by some random person scratching their itch, which there's nothing wrong with that by any means. But obviously when you have infrastructure powering a huge amount of the internet, like slow and fast can be a huge problem with some of these dependencies, which, great. I get that. And then you're also talking about Levelup, which one thing that I think we're starting to understand about the open source ecosystem that has kind of not been well known is that a lot of this stuff is not maintained or it's not well maintained, where like a developer wrote a thing and they threw it up on GitHub and they're like, whatever, I'm done. And then people started using it. And all of a sudden you have someone who maybe doesn't want to or isn't, kind of keeping, I don't know, I shouldn't say taking care of, keeping track of it. I don't blame them, right? I'm not saying like if you dump a thing on GitHub, you don't necessarily have a responsibility for it. But I'm very excited that your crew is paying attention to this and trying to do something about it. So that's really cool. So I want to start talking about cleanup because I kind of put a list together and that's what you get. But like, let's talk about that. So what do you mean when you say cleanup? Because I know you mentioned kind of replacing some of the packages, but like you have some really nice examples actually on your website. I'll put a link in the show notes, but like explain what cleanup is, kind of like, let's go into some of the details here.
Yeah. So the best example probably is Storybook. So
Yeah.
from a couple of years ago, well, maybe 1 to 2 years ago now, we worked with the Storybook team because Storybook was known as being this massive thing. And for context, by the way, if anyone hasn't used Storybook, it's basically a component catalog and testing tool for when you're building UIs and things. But basically, that was known as having like a crazy dependency tree. And a lot of that, it obviously isn't maintained by the Storybook team. It's deep dependencies that they don't have any control of. So at some point, people started trying to create alternatives to Storybook as a way of solving that problem, basically. Like, let's make a new one and that'll have fewer dependencies that are actively maintained. So we worked with the Storybook team instead to reduce all the dependencies, basically, get rid of all the stuff that can be done natively now. And eventually, I think it must have gone down from a few hundred dependencies deeply to like maybe 20 or 30 dependencies. uh, and most of those, the Storybook team can actively contribute to. Then it's feasible. You know, they're not dealing with having to contribute upstream to like hundreds of dependencies now. So the dependency tree is a lot smaller, and that's beneficial to them because it means the install size is a lot smaller for people to download it, and it's easier to maintain at that point. But yeah, the security side of it as well, in that we now have a smaller footprint basically in terms of a supply chain. But we want to do that to as many high impact JS libraries and tools as we can, basically, as a community. Like the Storybook one is showing an example, right? And we now want to follow that example and do that to as many high impact things, things with a lot of downloads and usage and dependence as possible. And hopefully give the same improvements then to everybody, basically, because we all consume these tools. So the more we can affect as a community, the more that we all gain, basically.
Okay, so I have a question about this because I was reading about some of the things you've done this work with, and we'll just pick on Storybooks. You brought it up. Is so when you're talking about decreasing dependencies, how often are you having to go, past Storybook into some of their dependencies and trying to work with those projects? Because like I know on your website, one of the examples you have is like Glob and Fast Glob, right? Where they're
Yeah.
functionally the same. Why do we have them both? And obviously you have them both because two different dependencies require, well, hopefully two different dependencies require them. But I'm curious because obviously working like directly with Storybook is probably very simple, but like how deep do you need to go in this tree to really kind of create the kind of change you're talking about?
Yeah, so this is a thing basically that has to be learned. So in the E18, like E18e is a community, right? First of all, and so the whole point is that we want to help people contribute to popular tools and things themselves. Um, so the thing that needs to be learned for people that want to get involved deeply in this is how to look for the point in the dependency tree where you can have the largest effect, basically. So an example in what you're asking about is in the globs, actually, for Tiny Globby. We will have looked at the dependency tree and found which things were pulling in Fast Glob and Globby and whatever else. And those things, so those packages will have also been deeply depended on, like they're not direct dependencies quite a lot of the time, but we will have contributed to those, to switch them away from Fast Glob and Globby and any other one. So that is a difficult job because you have to go around all these deep dependency repositories, contributing upstream. But it's not as simple as like going to the bottom of the tree and then contribute into the leaves, basically the leaf nodes. You have to kind of figure out in this tree, like at what point does it become a isolated subtree. So what I'm saying is, like, if you have a dependency up here that depends on this, and then there's a one here that depends on that, and then there's a subtree that nothing else depends on. That's the point at where you would chop it off, basically. And that's the bit that someone that's getting properly involved in this cleanup work has to learn that, like, where is the boundary? Because if you tried to contribute to every possible granular package upstream, you'd just never get anywhere. Like as you said earlier, a lot of them are not maintained,
Yeah.
so you would just get stuck basically. And just a note on that as well, like sometimes you do get blocked and it's not possible to migrate it. So then you go up one more level. You go up one more level in the dependency tree and you try contribute to that one instead. And if you can't do that, then you go up one more level until you get to the point where you can make change, basically. So yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's turtles all the way down, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's so I'm going to ask you a question that I'm sure someone has asked you before, and I'm only asking it because I want it asked. Like, why can't we just let an LLM go do this work for us, right?
Yeah, and it would it would probably end up rolling its own of everything, right?
Yes.
So you could say, well, I want you to reduce my dependency tree, and its solution would just be let's get rid of all the dependencies and inline everything. Because you weren't clear. You asked me to reduce the dependency tree. You didn't say do that by having a smarter choice of dependencies. So yeah, you could throw an LLM at this, but it would probably just result in a lot of duplication. Assuming this is a thing that you publish, like if this is a private app or something, then it doesn't matter as much because no one's depending on your thing. Uh, but still, obviously you should aim to have like uh, the least code for you to maintain. So that's the problem, really, in that it would introduce a lot more code that you now have to maintain because you're not pulling
Yeah.
it from somewhere.
And you have I don't remember where I read this on your site. I clicked around a lot. But one of the things you mention is projects that do kind of inline the dependencies, right? Because like in the Node.js world, you have the concept of packing where you'll just like literally take a dependency and just take the, HTML and JavaScript and whatever it has and like literally include that inside of your project. And there was something you mentioned where the install size was like, I think 30 or 60 megabytes. And it was because they were including all that. And like this, looking for this is one of the things you're doing. And I know in like the security world, we call these ghost dependencies quite often, where it's just copied code. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about with the LLM thing, right? Is that?
Yeah, and actually, like probably the most popular example of this now in the JS world is Next. Like the Next.js package only has 4 or 5 dependencies, I think. But it's a 500 meg or something package itself. And that's because all of its dependencies are bundled, really. So, they probably have their reason for doing that. It's some sort of DX choice or whatever. But that does mean now that they have vendored copies of all of the deep dependencies. And so then from the security point of view, your problem is, if a hotfix goes out or something, a security fix, you're not going to get it until they rebundle. So whoever then pulls Next.js in is now relying on the next team to ship fixes for their deep dependencies, rather than you just pulling it in naturally.
Yeah. Well, and even just knowing you have it, right? Because when something is pulled in like that, you might not even know it's there. So if you're trying to do some sort of, audit of your infrastructure, you think, oh, I have Next, I don't have this other thing. Great. Right. But you do.
Yeah, 100%. And it'd be really cool one day to do some sort of big analysis job, of the most popular packages, let's say, and you just scan them for bundled dependencies. Just out of curiosity to know how many are doing this, because it's probably quite a lot.
Oh, for sure. This sounds like something we might be able to Tom Sawyer, Andrew Nesbitt into doing.
Yeah.
Just drop some hints. Sounds like his cup of tea. So okay, so I want to move on to your second one on my list is Speedup. So I feel like this one is I it feels obvious, right? Like, let's make it faster and better, right? Better code. But I don't even know how I would start doing this, right? Because it's like such a, what do you do? Do you go to someone and be like, your code is crap? Here's a better copy. Like, I don't even know what I do here.
Yeah, like quite often the way this one is. So if you look at the cleanup category, we sort of go down the dependency tree and then work our way back
Yeah.
up. But from the speed up side of things, you basically want to benchmark something big and popular that people use at the top level, and then figure out how to make that faster by speeding up the dependencies. If it is the dependencies that are slowing it down. So an example is like when we improved Astro rendering performance. You know, that was just done by benchmarking Astro rendering, like which is a high level thing, like directly in the Astro repository. Um, so that one is just regular CPU profiling, but you know, who would think to try that because it's a stable thing that you know it's working. You would just assume the team is gonna do it one day, but that's not how it works. Like you need to be nudged to dig into the performance, basically. So part of what we're trying to do is just help these teams, you know, benchmark it and things and find bottlenecks and help improve them. But it's a much more involved process. So there's a lot fewer people in our community that do this stuff because it's like a deep dive in performance stuff, you know, profiling.
Yeah, which is hard to do. And I think one of the other challenges is, I mean, if we think of it from like a very business perspective, no one's going to buy your product because you made it 10% faster, right? They want new features. Features are what sell products, not saying, oh, this version's 10% faster. People are going to be like, I don't care, right?
Yeah, yeah. And a good example actually of why we would do this is probably the prettier CLI. So you know, people prettier the formatter, people knew that it's pretty slow. And at some point we did a like deep dive into how to improve the performance because at the time everybody used it for formatting code in the JS world, basically. Like there's alternatives now, but it's still the most popular by far. And so, you know, we did a deep dive of how to make that faster. Fabio, that's one of the members in e18e, basically built a new CLI for it that was a lot faster, and that's now inside Prettier. And you know, it was like a 10 times speed up or something.
Whoa.
Yeah, but it's like that kind of thing is affecting a tool that uh, everybody uses. So you know how many projects around the world now run faster locally and have faster CI and whatever else because of this one package getting faster.
Yeah.
So we're trying to attack it that way, you know, like a lot of it is developer experience stuff in that it's not runtime. It's not like what you ship to a web app or something. But at the same time, we do improvements like the Astro one to runtime stuff as well. But that's a lot harder because it's like way more variable. You know, it depends heavily on how people ship websites, basically.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, out of curiosity, I haven't seen this anywhere on your site, but has like memory usage been a topic? 'Cause I know like the price of RAM is ridiculous right now, and I feel like anything I could do to reduce RAM usage on any of my apps would definitely be a welcome change.
Yeah, and we've done some work as a community like that with frameworks at least. So I'm like, for example, we worked with the Svelte team to reduce memory of the Svelte parser, I think it was, and the ESLint plugin as well. And I'm pretty sure we did some stuff in TypeScript ESLint to reduce the memory usage. You know, mostly dev tools again in that case, but it just means like your local dev setup then is using a lot less memory,
Yeah.
which is what we all want. So
Right, right. Well, and I mean, buying a laptop with what 64 gigs of RAM is just out of the question right now, I think, for most people. So yeah, less
Yeah,
RAM
yeah.
and CI runners as well, right? Like CI runners have a ton of memory pressure now.
Well, you don't usually realize like things grow over time. So, something that used to use very little memory, incrementally has sort of just gone up and up and up. And then before you know it, like it's using half your memory or something.
Yes.
So yes, some of that stuff works similar in terms of contributions to the CPU profiling stuff. That if we find someone that cares enough to dig into it, then they can do memory profiling and stuff.
Yeah.
But it is a lot less common for us to do that than the other tasks, just because it's an in-depth thing, like a research job, basically. Uh, but we do it. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to see more of it actually as well.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. I mean, heck, I remember a few years ago, man, like we'd be planning some feature or something. And so someone would always say, RAM is cheap, like whatever, like not anymore.
Yeah, and like stuff adds up as well. This is one of the difficult things to convey to maintainers is that memory and CPU, you can often turn up in like a small package that's used by loads of projects and say, well, can you change this piece of code to this piece of code because it uses less memory? And to them, in their world, it looks like it's barely anything. But if you've got to remember that's like a leaf at the bottom of this massive dependency tree that's used by most of it. And
Yeah.
so when you
Yeah.
get to the top, it's actually the reason for like most of the memory and most of the CPU time. So yeah, getting that across to uh, maintainers is a difficult one when doing these contributions, because we're looking at much bigger picture than like your
Yeah.
package. Uh, but yeah, the ones that do understand it then have improved the entire ecosystem. If they're a popular enough package.
Which is amazing. I love that. All right. I wanna jump to level up before we run ourselves out of time here because this one I think is the most interesting, but I also have a lot of questions. So your idea behind level up is I'm just going to read what you have on your website here. You say,
Yeah.
modern runtimes provide features that enable packages to be leaner, blah, 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 blah. And so the intent, my understanding, is there is a lot of old stuff. There are new ways things might be done. Other new packages might have more features than they did in the past. The runtimes, like the things in Node proper, are vastly different than they were, a decade ago or when a lot of these things were made. A lot of these packages are maintained or poorly maintained. And so it sounds like you guys are trying to just like literally build new projects that do this stuff. Did I get that or did I miss something?
Yeah, yeah. So the priority is always try contribute upstream, to
Yeah.
modernize popular libraries and things. But that's not always possible because it might be unmaintained or it might just have a different direction it's going. The maintainers might have a different goal. Or some other reason like that. And in those cases, it makes sense to create a new package where you can modernize it. You can use like new engine features and new syntax and stuff like that. So Tiny Globby is probably a good example of this in that eventually it'll probably switch to using the built-in glob function that's inside Node under the hood. So it'll just be a thin layer on top of Node's own glob function. Whereas all the other globbing libraries that it replaced, their direction is different. They want to keep their own implementation because it has differences. Whereas we're saying, well, most consumers don't care about that. Most consumers just want, like source/star/star.ts or something. They're all basic globs, basically. So, this is part of. I think I did a blog post about this at some point, but it's basically that edge case first code is what we ended up with, and
Yes.
part of the level up stuff is to reverse that, where you end up with the common case is implemented, and the people that want the strange edge cases can use a different library. And if you switch that around, everything gets a lot smaller and faster because you're not accounting for all of these special cases. Uh,
Yeah.
which I think more libraries should do that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. So, all right. So here's my question though. Here's what I wonder is how many, I don't want to sound like a jerk. Have you angered any of the projects that you maybe have forked or created a new version of in this particular effort?
Uh, Probably not angered, but I can't remember off the top of my head, but there have been debates and things.
Okay.
For example, when we started promoting Pico colors, which is just a library for doing terminal colors. There was a lot of debate about you shouldn't move away from chalk, even though this Pico colors library is faster and smaller. You shouldn't switch to it for various reasons, and most of the reasons were, well, chalk is older and the maintainer's been around a long time, so you might as well stick with it. It's safer. Um, and fair enough, but that's the user's choice, right? We shouldn't be telling people like to stick on a much older implementation when there's something better available for their case. So yeah, we have had some debates like that. But usually everybody is open to modernization at least, and
Nice.
especially speeding things up. But that's also why we ideally want to contribute. We don't want to have to replace these. If we could just improve the existing ones, we always would want to do that. Because it'd also increase adoption since everybody uses it already. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Here's the big close, James. So when we think of a lot of these problems, I think we often think of the technology behind it, right? Where we think about the patches and the level up projects and however we're going to work with making things better. But I think everything you have described and everything I've read, this is fundamentally people, right? Like it's all people. You've built a community of people that like the motivations behind them are all different. And like, I think this is amazing, right? Like this is how open source is supposed to work, where you've collected a bunch of random people doing a bunch of random stuff with a somewhat common goal in mind. You're going to projects where you have to interact with them. Cause like one of the things I've noticed, in this whole like LLM universe right now is there's nothing that angers open source developers more than getting like some drive-by LLM PR, right? Versus interaction and like human contact. And
Yeah.
so like I'm curious if this is something you have in mind, and I suspect you do because just everything you've said so far, but like this is people, right? Like it's all people, all the way up and down this whole project.
Yeah, and we are trying to build tools to help people do this themselves, or some of it. But
Nice.
ultimately, yeah, it's always people on purpose because even for example, when we contribute upstream, we have like a process that's followed where it's reach out to the maintainers first to find out if they're even interested. And
Yeah.
only if they signal interest, then you can open an issue about the individual changes that we want to do. And only if they get accepted, then someone should open a PR. Like there's a process to follow. Uh, and that's to avoid just flooding a bunch of repos with PRs because everybody's got enough of that
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
But yeah, on like a purposeful choice is that we're not automating a bunch of this because it's important that maintainers speak to each other basically, and they understand that even if there's some disagreement or like different directions, we should discuss it rather than just conflict or whatever. So yeah, I think like that's probably one of the most important things to build a community of people, and get everybody working together.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that I know in this day and age, I think often people think of open source as a license and packages, but it's always been the people, and it always will be the people, I suspect. And this is that I will say, so lurking in your Discord for quite a while, that is the one thing that I think I find the most impressed of it is you have a group of people that are very focused on like talking to each other and talking to other groups, which is, I mean, it's saying that it should be obvious, right? Like it's one of those things that's like, well, duh. But I feel like we've gotten away from that in a lot of ways with a lot of open source we do today.
Yeah, 100%. And like I'd love to see more of this because
Yeah.
in the framework performance project we have going on, for example, uh, Alex, that's mostly leading it, he basically talks to most of the framework teams themselves about the stats that we're pulling and things like that, and possible improvements upstream. All of that is communication between like big JS framework teams and the E18e community, and then everything about suggestions to what packages we promote and things like that, and what we should improve and what we should speed up. All of that really happens in the Discord as a discussion between a bunch of people, and people share things. Loads of people share things all the time where they've just said, oh, I've been using this package for the last few years and it's not maintained, so I made a new one. Do you want to check it out? And then all of a sudden it gets popular because people are looking into it because it's a person behind it. So
Yeah.
it's really good to see that community building basically. And it just happens naturally now that people know it's a space to collaborate and share, basically. Not
Yeah.
many of those exist these days. Well, they do, but there's fewer of them over time, I think, which is a
Yeah.
shame.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. All right. All right, James, let's land this plane. Tell us how to get involved if we're listening to this and this sounds interesting, because this is, I'll admit, like performance and things, it's definitely a very nerdy niche, but it's
Yeah.
also, I love that you've created a place for people that love this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So if you want to get involved, basically the main place to be is the Discord, but you can find
Yeah.
that on the e18e.dev website. And you can basically check out, we have a repo called ecosystem issues, and this ecosystem issues repo is basically like GitHub issues for tracking upstream contributions. So it might be we should migrate this popular package to ES modules. So there's loads of issues like that are ready to be picked up, and they're all labeled with things like, needs first contact or something. And so if it's labeled as that, then you could contribute by going to the repo and asking, being the first contact, asking the maintainer if they're interested. And then if they're not, we label it as they're not interested. And then that's when we can pick some other thing to use, or we can contribute to some other project. So there's loads of labeled issues like that are really easy to pick up. But I would definitely say just come along to the Discord and say hi. And there's tons of people that are always willing to help out and chat about things.
Yeah. And I'll tell anyone listening, like, if you join this Discord, you're going to learn a lot of crazy stuff. Like, there's a lot of really cool conversations. It's definitely worth a join, just a lurk.
Yeah, and there's so many good people in there, like maintainers of really popular projects and frameworks and tools, and like all the influential people in the JS world are probably in that Discord.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they all want to make their own projects faster as well, and make them leaner and everything else.
For
So
sure.
yeah, everybody's on the same page pretty much.
Yeah. I love this. I love this project so much. I mean, this is amazing, right? Like, I hope we see this for every ecosystem, every language, everything, that could possibly exist, because this is the kind of work I love to see. And the one other thing I will say, and this is just a giant thank you to you and the whole community, is this is Morlock work, right? This is stuff that is not going to get attention. This is stuff that's not going to be even seen or understood by the vast majority of people. And so the fact that you've created a community of people that are basically like working in the mines and will never see the light of day is awesome and amazing. So just thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no, I'm very thankful of the people that are part of the community as well, including yourself. It wouldn't be a thing if we weren't all there. So the only reason it works is because we all joined together.
For sure. That's perfect. I love that ending. All right, James, this has been a treat. I cannot wait to talk to you in the near future to find out all the crazy cool stuff you've been up to, but this has been a blast, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.